Vasudeva. Yeah. The mic ain't on. Can you turn on? Can you turn the mic on? You want to try? I tried. It's difficult. I don't think it up. It's on, but there's got to be something that lets the juice go through. That's the problem. But it's on. It's just not. Yeah.
And we switch. Speak louder.
Sorry.
So welcome everyone to Bhagavata Sravana today. I'm your speaker and your host as well. So Champakalatis is in India. Can everybody hear me well? Otherwise, for those who cannot hear so well, we have a few seats up here. So today we have a special topic. Well, the topic is always Srimad Bhagavatam, but there's a special context to it. That is the life, teachings, and departure of His Holiness Kadambakananda Swami, who is my revered spiritual master. He passed away from this world on March 9th, a little less than a month ago. It was a very glorious departure and a very glorious life he led. Now, generally speaking, as a disciple, it's a principle you don't really reveal your guru. You kind of keep your guru hidden. Because most sacred things, when kept sacred, they stay more dear to you. Or anything like sacred is kept confidential. It stays more sacred. When you advertise like some realization you have very widely, then very often a little bit of pride can come in, like, oh, look at me and my realization, or look at me and my guru. And that happens, and we also see this in our movement. People advertise themselves on the basis of their guru. So you post a picture with you and your guru, and things like that. Sometimes it's done in a very genuine way, but that can often come in. So that's why the scriptures warn that keep your guru a little hidden. Just advertise him by being who you are, by your qualities, by your behavior, instead of like posting the picture and taking your credentials from that. Not saying that that's always the case, but it could happen. So what I'm willing to take that risk today, because this departure just happened. A lot of devotees in this community and in the worldwide community had a lot of affection for him, and we're also following his departure online and are expressed so much interest to hear about, what happened and about him as a person. So. Knowing him closely for many years, I thought to share something about him, who he is, what moved him, and also about his departure was very glorious, and I feel can be very faith-giving to all of us when I was practicing the path of bhakti. So that's why I kind of departing from this principle and chose to speak about my own guru. So I will start with singing Radha Madhava, a song very dear to Kadambakananda Swami. In fact, he wanted, he got buried in Vrindavan, and then you get a samadhi or a tomb, and generally you put different statements from Shastra or from that personality himself on that tomb to remind whoever is visiting who that person is and what was dear to him. It's a message there. So on his tomb, on the outside will be Vaishnava Sevana, service to the Vaishnavas. And on the other side, Nirantara Krishna Nama Sankirtana, seasonally chanting Sankirtan, the holy names of Krishna. That would be on the outside. So then we had a discussion, well, there should be something on the inside. Somebody suggested that to him, Gurujan Prabhu. He said, oh, okay. So then he thought about it. Actually had me look into verses, like what could be in there. So I spent like a whole night mining the Shastra for something which really, would depict his quality. But the next day I came and he already decided himself. what was going there. And he said, Jaya Radha Manava Kunja Vihari, that song he wanted within his, as his inner, as a kind of a symbol of his inner absorption. Because as we'll hear today, his spiritual life in Krishna consciousness really started in Vrindavan. He did a lot of very, very difficult and very valuable service in Vrindavan. And then in the end, he came back to Vrindavan, the holy abode of Krishna, where Krishna had his pastimes. And he left the world from there. And I could see whenever he would travel the world as a sannyasi, as a mendicant, he, the traveling monk, he would give classes everywhere, Bhagavatam classes especially. And always he would, as we always do, chant Radha Madhava, but for him, this was actually always one of my favorite kirtans for me to sit in, because he would always be so deeply absorbed when he would chant that, and I could always feel like he's wherever he may be in the world, through that song he's entering back into Vrindavan. That's his meditation on Vrindavan, his inner absorption. So, so that's, I thought just briefly sing this song. Most of you know it. Those who cannot, it won't be too long. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopi Janna Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Namah.
So we'll read a few verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, which are suitable for the topic. Also, today is Easter, the departure, disappearance of Lord Jesus Christ. And Srila Prabhupada actually mentions Jesus Christ in his purport to this verse. It's verse Srimad Bhagavatam 325-21. Canto 3, chapter 25, text 21. So if you want to keep it on your phone. Otherwise, just listen carefully. Titiksha karmika suridak sarvadenam ajata shutra shanta sadhava sadhu bhushana. The symptoms of a sadhu is that he's tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies. He's peaceful. He abides by the scriptures, and all his characteristics are sublime. So Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he explains how sadhus, saintly people, they're karunika, they're merciful. They feel for the suffering of others, and they want to relieve others of their suffering. They are quite happy themselves, but their heart bleeds seeing the suffering of others. That's why they try to help, and that's why they preach. That's why they spread God consciousness wherever they go. And that's not always being appreciated by everyone. And that's why we see often saintly people, they have to undergo a lot of misery or suffering in this world because they kind of challenge the status quo. Because the status quo is always like, I, me, mine. We live here to enjoy this world. And the sadhu says, no, this world is not for your enjoyment. This world is for service to God, for surrender to God, for giving your heart and life to God. So that is often perceived as very challenging to those who have different views on that. So as a result, there's persecution and so forth. So Prabhupada says, Lord Jesus Christ was crucified. Haridas Thakur was caned in 22 marketplaces. And Lord Chaitanya's principal assistant Nityananda was violently attacked by Jagai and Madhai. But still they were tolerant because their mission was to deliver the fallen souls. So one of the qualifications of a sadhu that he's very tolerant and is merciful to all fallen souls. He's merciful because he's the well-wisher of all living entities. The Suridam Sarvadrinam, the friend of all living beings. And then other things I mentioned, he has no enemies. Even though attacked, does not consider that person who attacks him as an enemy, but even tries to do good to them, as Jesus Christ said, like, Lord, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And abides by the scriptures, very strictly follows a very high standard of moral, spiritual principles, and all his characteristics are sublime. So they develop many good qualities: kindness, tolerance, compassion, expertise, poetic. There's so many qualities described of great personalities. So then I'll read on. Such a sadhu engages in staunch devotional service to the Lord without deviation, For the sake of the Lord, he renounces all other connections, such as family relationships and friendly acquaintances within the world. It doesn't mean that a sadhu necessarily gives up his family or all friendly acquaintances, but his heart is really into service to God as his prime or her prime focus in life. And as a result, sometimes they may also externally adopt the renounced order, as Kadambakanda Swami did. And this verse specifically, the next verse, really captures a lot of what I've seen in his character and in his qualities, especially in the last phase of his life. Engaged constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The sadhus do not suffer from material miseries because they're always filled with thoughts of my pastimes and activities. So Srila Prabhupada comments, there are multifarious miseries in the material world. We all experience that. And we're all very much generally affected by it. Right? When something happens to us, when we're ill, when we're diseased, when something, there's some reversal in our lives, we become affected, and it affects our spiritual life. So there's three miseries, Prabhupada says. Those pertaining to the body and mind, those imposed by other living entities, and those imposed by natural disturbances. But the sadhu is not disturbed by such miserable conditions. Why not? Because his mind is always filled with Krishna consciousness. And thus he does not like to talk about anything but the activities of the Lord. So because they have a higher absorption, they're absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, chanting about him, hearing about him. The consciousness is all on a different level and can transcend the bodily identification. I'll return to that. So these verses will kind of set the scene of what I'll be speaking to. So I want to start with a short kind of biographical sketch of Kadambakanda Swami. And in the course of that, highlight some of his teachings, very important to him, which is really the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the teachings of Srila Prabhupada. We all, by following it, we get different realizations from that. So I want to highlight some of his realizations he emphasized a lot during his life, and which also have an implication in his departure and how that all unfolded. And and then finally I will describe his departure and what led up to it, and how that all went about. It was very, very extraordinary. So Kadambakanda Swami Maharaj was born in 1953 in the Netherlands. And we're kind of from the same area of Holland. We went to a similar school, so we could relate on that level quite well. He was born in quite a wealthy family. I'm not from such a wealthy family, but he was born, his father was like a very successful businessman. He had a very strained relationship with his father because his father was quite materialistic and a troubled person. So this difficult family situation for him. So of course he grew up in the 50s, the 60s, the time to rebuild after the war, and the Netherlands was very much affected by the war. Been occupied for 5 years. Everyone was still traumatized, but there was this kind of collective push to build back up, and it was like a very materialistic focus as a result. So his generation really, really rejected that, as they did here in the US as well. Maybe from a slightly different angle. So by 1970, when he was 17 years old, he left. He dropped out of high school He didn't finish it, although he was about to finish. He was a very good student actually, because he's a very intelligent person. He's very much an autodidact. He spoke 7 languages fluently. He spoke Dutch, English, Hindi, Bengali, French, German, and Spanish. So whenever he go to Spain, he would speak in Spanish. He go to Germany, he would speak in German. He go to France, he would speak in French. Hindi spoke fluently. Bengali a little broken, but you know, you still get Bengali classes whenever he was in Mayapur. But it's all he all taught it himself. So he's very, very intelligent, but there was kind of like a push for him to become like his father, to take over the family business, but not for him. Because he was seeking something higher. He was seeking truth. So he left and he started like traveling a lot at that time, mostly in Europe. And then he met people who came from India. And he was very intrigued by going to India. So over land, he traveled to India. Very similar to Radhanath Swami at the time, if you read the journey home. So he entered India through Pakistan at the time. I don't know which year that was the early 70s. That may even be like 97, 71. And he came to like the how you say, the border? And how you call the person on the border? Yeah, like the customs agent.
Immigration.
Immigration guy. He was like a Tsar. He was like a Sikh. Was an Amrit Tsar. So he had like, he had a turban. And he said, "Why are you coming to India?" He said, "Well, I heard you have this is a very spiritual country." And then he said, "Oh, very nice." So then the customs agent took him to the train station and bought him a ticket to Varanasi. And like, yeah, you should go there. So he was immediately so impressed by India. Like, where does that happen? It happens like nowhere. Like, but India has such a rich spiritual culture and there's a certain generosity of people and hospitality, which just immediately captured him. So he went to Varanasi, and so one of the earliest memories he has from that is that he saw a dead body just lying on the street. And he saw people throwing coins on that body. So of course, coming from the West, he's like shocked, like what's happening? That body here, and people throwing coins at it. And he asked him, like, what's happening? Well, he said, like, this is a beggar. He had no money, but we're throwing coins so that somebody will ultimately come, will take the money and does his cremation and does the last rite for that person. So very, just the culture and the way people thought about life and death and just the spirituality which was present so much in that culture, it really, really captured him. So for the next 8 years, he would spend his time between Holland and India, and then he would travel elsewhere in Europe too. But he was a musician, like a very talented guitar player. And there was like a couple of tracks he did with guitar playing. He was a very, very good guitar player. He wouldn't play much as a sannyasi. He didn't. But it's something he wanted to put so much attention to. Although he engaged all his musical talent, of course, in kirtan in different ways. But and he would sing songs, and he said, even then my songs would have a message. Like I would sit in front of crowds, and like I would wanted to move them in some way, like change them in some way. So he would sing songs about meaningful things. And he even would quote some of his songs in his classes. Like one of them, these old hungry eyes, they've told me many lies, but they're still not satisfied. That's something he would regularly quote. It could almost go in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Like, justice is never satisfied. We try to fill it more and more, it's never satisfied. We have these kind of realizations. And he would speak about it. He would be kind of like, as we say in old-fashioned word, a preacher, even then. So one of his songs was, and I quote, one of his songs, a line he also would quote sometimes, quote, "I'm nothing but a stranger, always around. I'm nothing but a seeker for something I've never found." Someone once asked him, when you went to India, were you looking for God? And he said, no, I wasn't looking for God, I was looking for truth. So he had that seeking spirit. And I think he always maintained that, like, for his whole life. That it is, till the end, always a kind of that mood of, like, exploring, seeking, never being, like, satisfied with, like, the status quo or, like, some role he had to play. He was always, like, very dynamically engaged. Externally, but also internally. Always seeking to improve himself, seeking to have deeper realization. And always like a stranger, always like, he was always like very much, sometimes he would compare himself to, there's a book called Hermann Hesse called Steppenwolf. He was almost like, felt like a very much a renunciant or monk by heart. Always like kind of feeling like I'm alone in this world. Of course, he had many relationships, but always like very much like had this deep internal life, and never being just part of the crowd, and always very much, although he would be always part of many crowds, he always kept very much like an internal focus within all of that. He finally joined the Krishna conscious movement in 1978. Of course, he had met devotees in Amsterdam. First time he saw devotees, he saw a van stopping on the down square, the main square, and he saw, as he described it, way too many bald men coming out of that van. There were just so many. How could they all fit in that van? And then they all started chanting in some kind of getting into like, it wasn't like a very, there was a bit of like, to him looked like a little fanatic. They were all like kind of standing in a circle and like getting into this kirtan. And then later on he heard about the regulative principles. No intoxication, no illicit sex, no meat eating, no. And he was like, these people are too fanatic. They are just too much. This is like, he said, some they say they are a dangerous cult, and he wouldn't say they are a dangerous cult, but he had like a strong distrust of devotees. And then sometimes, devotees would distribute books, and they would sometimes like put on disguise, like just having a hat or even wigs, just to kind of not be noticed. Otherwise, people would reject him very easily. So, but he could tell, like, yeah, this is a devotee. And he said, like, he would just like walk straight past them. So he was very distrustful, actually, of devotees. And even though he knew about them, but then still, Krishna would kind of appear in his life in very mysterious ways. For example, famous story, you may have heard it. He had a girlfriend. He got involved with a girl, and it became his girlfriend. And she had a dog. Now guess what was the name of the dog? Krishna. She called the name after Krishna Murti, who she read books of it, so she called it Krishna, because Krishna Murti is too long, so that's Krishna. And that dog would kind of go off wandering. So then he would sometimes walk a dog, and the dog would be like out there somewhere, and he had to call, Krishna! Krishna! So in this way he was like doing Harinam in Amsterdam. Although he didn't know actually what he was doing at the time. He also started reading Bhagavad Gita at that time, and he got a little more interested in philosophy. And he was a musician, of course. So one friend of his was a piano player, and he said, like, I have this mantra. Let's play this mantra together. So he would play guitar, he would play piano, and he was chanting Hare Krishna. So then he really got into chanting. So that moved him. So then another friend of his started to become a little involved in Krishna consciousness. Of course, he was still like kind of doubtful, distrustful, but he said, like, when you go to India next, you have to go to Vrindavan. So that's what he did. He went to India. He had already bought a ticket by that time. So he was already planning to go there. So he went to Delhi and he took a train to Mathura. And then he asked, when he came to Mathura, is Vrindavan, is that very far? He said, no. Not very far, not very far. So can I walk? So, then he started walking, so he walked for 50 miles to Vrindavan. But he said, and later on he looked back at this, that's like, he walked right on that road. It's called Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg. It's the road in front of the temple, the ISKCON temple. And there's a gate there called the Bhaktivedanta Swami Gate. It's like a kind of like a victory gate. Like you have gates here as well, like victory, how do you call them? Arches. You find them like the Champs-Élysées in Paris for like Napoleon. And so in Vrindavan, they were so proud that he spread Krishna consciousness everywhere and brought people from all over the world to Vrindavan. They erected a gate in his honor, like a victory gate. So he walked through that gate into Vrindavan. And so later on, he very much, felt like, yeah, this is actually so appropriate that we enter Vrindavan through that gate, through Srila Prabhupada's grace. So then he stayed there at the temple. And it was still like a little awkward for him, like first time like he attended something like a Tulsi Puja. And he saw like there's this plant brought in the center and then everybody's bowing down in front of the plant and he was like, okay. So he didn't just dive into it. He was very skeptical and very much himself. He wouldn't just like surrender to anything. But then he could see, actually being with the devotees, he could see that their fanaticism was actually more than just that. It was just like they had a lot of love for Srila Prabhupada. At that time it was 1978, and Prabhupada had just departed from Vrindavan. And Prabhupada actually had personally stayed for spent a lot of time in Vrindavan, and he personally took responsibility for the management of that temple. Because Vrindavan is the heart, is the center of our movement, as is Mayapur, but he was very concerned that our temple there should be like on the highest standard, because it's the heart. So if the heart is healthy, then it will reverberate throughout the world. So it was very much like Prabhupada wanted things to be like this and like that. And he could see the devotees were so dedicated, but out of a love, out of a real love and dedication to Srila Prabhupada. So that very much moved him. And then he started to spend time in Prabhupada's Samadhi and in his house where Prabhupada passed away and reading his books and hearing more about it. So he became very attached to Prabhupada. He would sometimes tell me, like, actually, I didn't join ISKCON, I joined Prabhupada. It wasn't like that institution that was like the more difficult part. But when Prabhupada really, his example, his teaching, his selflessness, and how deeply he touched his followers by his example and teachings, that really, really moved him. Because he was not seeking for God, he was seeking for truth. And for something very authentic. And you could see that Prabhupada is authentic, he's the real deal. Like so much other things he encountered in his life. So then he joined there in Vrindavan for some time. And finally he went back to the Netherlands. And it was a little bit of a different Krishna conscious scene. It was much more like those days the movement was very different. It was like an army, you know. Everybody was like going out on book distribution, and it was like a very militaristic mood. And he did not like that. He was like, at some point somebody told him, "Don't think, just follow." And he was like, "I'm out of here." He was like, "I'm gone." So then he was like, he went back to Vrindavan, where the mood was very different. It was more like, "Oh, can you do this? Do it." And it was like not micromanaging. It was like, okay, the leadership was then more like empowering. So yeah, he liked that. Like he could just do things and express himself. By that time also, he had a long relationship already for many years, and his girlfriend or fiance also joined him at that time. So he joined married, which was kind of unusual at the time. It was like, he said, like, I was like a white spot in an ocean of saffron. And now things turned. Later in his later life, he was like a saffron spot in an ocean of white. So yeah, he joined. Also, he was very honest about it. Like, yeah, I wasn't ready at that time to just renounce everything. I was still attached. And so they joined together. And of course, India was very austere at the time. No ACs, water, you know, you would be happy to get clean water. So he stayed there in Vrindavan for many years, doing many austerities, living through hot summers, cold winters, taking on very intense management responsibilities. Immediately having to become a leader. He said, like, one of his first services when he went back to Vrindavan was, he said, like, okay, you can serve in the restaurant, because he was a very good cook actually, so he was cooking, and he liked that. But then very quickly, like the next day after he started cooking, something happened with the restaurant manager, who then left, and then they said, okay, now you're the manager. So he said, okay. So then he realized, I was looking for inspiration for like someone like senior or someone more experienced to guide me. He said, like, from that day, he said, like, I'm going to be the inspiration. I'm not going to depend on anyone else. I'm just going to be a leader. I'm going to be the inspiration. So he kept to that actually. Yeah, then he got initiated. He became Kadamba Kanana Swami. Kadamba Kanana Rasa Parayana Das, his full name. Very long. Krishna, who's taking shelter of the Rasa dance in the Kadamba Kanana, in the Kadamba groves. Kadamba is a tree which grows in Vrindavan, very characteristic of Vrindavan. And his guru at that time, Bhavananda Das, who later on left the movement for some time, so that was another thing he had to deal with, that his guru left ISKCON and was not a guru anymore. But at that time he saw he's good at managing, because although he's from this kind of family where his father was of course running a business and something he didn't really want to do, but he's still very expert, a very organized person. Even like in his departure, his will and he even organized like the feast which was to be served out on his memorial, and like he specified all the specific items and who would make them. And he was very good in organizing. So he saw it, and he said, and then he said he was already managing different things, and he was like, "Do you like construction?" And he said, "No, not particularly." He said, "Oh, good. From now on, you're in charge of all the construction in Mayapur." He was sent to Mayapur, which is in West Bengal, and he was made in charge of construction. Now, in India, everything you do is always like 10 times more difficult. So construction is already difficult, and in India it's 10 times more difficult. And if you're a Westerner in India, it's like another 10 times more difficult. So, and then they made him in charge of building the Samadhi the temple in honor of Srila Prabhupada there. Now what had happened is that there was a structure there, half built, and the architect had also kind of left the project, and there were, as far as I recall, no more drawings. So there was just this half-built structure which started to become overgrown by the Indian nature and the Indian climate was bearing on it. So he said, okay, you have to finish, his mission was to finish this project. So this was like mission impossible, like working with like 500 workers, not having any drawings. Like, so first of all, he got the drawings made, he got an architect involved, and that meant like working tirelessly day after day, the heat and the cold. It was like, sometimes my poor get like 50 degrees Celsius, which is something like 120 plus degrees, and still had to work. Jai Vetamar says when the construction worker was lying with a wet cloth under a truck, and other managers would be inside their office with their cooler on, he would be like loading a truck with his wife, who also was very dedicated soul at that time. So after 6 years of doing this, he finally, and getting every disease you could possibly get. One time he had to even leave during that time, or some other time he had to leave for about a year because he had malaria 12 times. So he was like emaciated and like very weak. So it was very, very difficult. But he completed it. It was like mission impossible, but he completed that. But just before he completed it and seeing like the full like victory of like having the satisfaction of, oh, it's accomplished, he was called to Vrindavan to become the temple president or the main manager. Because what has happened is Vrindavan is in Uttar Pradesh, which is a rogue state, really. It's getting better now, but there's a lot of organized crime in that state, and that kind of seeps into everything, especially when there's money. So the temple had become quite infested with kind of undercover organized crime, with taking some key positions and kind of like almost taking over the temple. So after 6 years of like building this massive building under very difficult circumstances, it was like, okay, another mission impossible. You reclaim this temple, for which really literally means putting your life on the line. Because these people, it's still there. It's like they would kill. You come in your way as in any organized crime, you get in their way, they have no qualms about taking you out. So that was his next mission impossible, reclaiming the temple. So gradually, I don't know what he all went through, but the kind of games he must have played at that time to, you have to kind of become people's friend, otherwise they really become suspicious. So it's like, it's a very delicate line you have to walk between like managing the place day after day, and then gradually moving the pieces aside. So you, of course, he made some enemies there, although sadhu was without enemies. He didn't want to create any enmity, but for the service of Prabhupada, he had to be very strong at times. And as a result, after some years of being there, he got shot. And this is also like just managing Vrindavan temple is already very difficult. Managing with like organized crime around you is even more difficult. Keeping like also like a very high sadhana practice becomes almost like superhuman. So his sadhana in Vrindavan would be, he was kind of struggling because he would be very, very strict. Like he would never miss like a morning service, morning program, always get up like 4 o'clock. But often he would go to bed like at 10:30, and it was kind of draining him. Then he went to the West he had to go to the West for some time. He came back, he had a jet lag. So he woke up very early. So he chanted all his rounds, 16 rounds, like before Mongol Arati, and then he read, and he did the whole morning program. He felt very strong spiritually. He said, then he said, I'm going to do this. Now we heard about the sadhu engaged in staunch devotional service. Now if I know anyone who is staunch, it's Kadamba Kami Swami. He was like so determined. If he wanted something, he would give it all and everything for it. Like he would put. So he said, I'm going to be successful at this. I'm going to manage this place. I'm going to reclaim this for Prabhupada. And I'm going to not also cave in spiritually. I'm going to be spiritually strong. So he would get up every day, 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning, chant all his rounds before Mangalarti, read Srimad Bhagavatam for 1.5 hours, go for the full morning program, give classes a lot whenever he could. So he would always, every day, he would give a class somewhere just for his inspiration. And always being positive, always like saying, always, never being let down by all this negativity around. Always looking for the positive, always looking for Krishna, always looking for inspiration and giving inspiration to others. On the expense of like his just as he would say, like living on he liked to live on the cutting edge, like giving his all, like not holding back. So, and as a result, he got shot like very early in the morning while he was taking his morning bath. Somebody came with a gun above the bathroom he was in. And then he nearly died. He was hanging by a thread. And he also didn't want to go to some fancy hospital. He didn't want to leave Vrindavan. So but he just left. He said, I was thinking of Krishna, he said. When you're a devotee and you're almost dying, we take shelter of Krishna. He said was not that difficult. But I felt at that time I don't have enough love for Krishna. I remember Krishna, but I don't remember him with love. So then he said, he made a commitment to Krishna. If I survive, next time I'm going to pass on. I'm in this situation, I want to have more love for you. So then he did survive, and as always, he would take the positive out of it. So then he became a sannyasi. He said he already died, so and his wife were already more or less separated with mutual agreement in very good terms. Not because they were fighting too much, but because he was just going to this very intense spiritual level, and she just wanted to kind of let it go. It was actually very beautiful to see their relationship, and also I spoke with her a lot. She just wanted him to, fully express himself and become the leader and the spiritual leader he was meant to be. So she led also with her blessings. He became a renunciant. That was his calling. And that's when I met him also. When he became a renunciant, he became based in Europe. That's when I just started to come to the temple, and our relationship developed from there. So then for the last 25 years, he's been traveling the world tirelessly, like same intensity as he would manage. He would inspire devotees, counsel them, kirtans, give classes, always giving of himself and giving more of himself. And sometimes he would say, oh, I overdid it again. Like, he would always have some health issue. And despite of ill health, he would always keep going. Like, sometimes I knew he would be very ill, but nobody else would know, because he would still be giving classes. He would still be leading like this massive kirtans, putting his everything into it. Still he would like see this devotee or that person, always giving of himself and giving more of himself and even more of himself. Like when I could think, how is this even physically possible? So I could see he was like really transcending the bodily platform. I've seen the same thing with His Holiness Radhanath Swami. Like sometimes he'll be like smiling at everyone in the crowd, but I know like he's actually really ill. But he can like transcend it. Like these two people I could see they more than anyone else I've seen that extraordinary level of consciousness. So as fate would have it, making a long story short, Kadam Kanswam was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, and he got cured from it, the doctor said, but then he kind of came back with a vengeance. And so he called me, like, I spoke with him like in May 2022, about a year ago, and he said, like, I just recovered from COVID, so he was asking, how are you doing, what's going on? And then I explained to him, I just have COVID, I want to come see you very soon. He was in New York at the time. And then he said, I also have a little health issue, he said. So then he broke the news that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, a stage 4 cancer, and he had like between 6 months and a year to live. So, of course, he said, like, I'm not dying yet, so I'm just, he wasn't thinking so much about like himself in dying. He was like, I'm just gonna give as much as I can to, especially those who are connected to me, give as much as I can to spread Krishna consciousness and to help devotees and to make sure devotees are well. Like that's why he went to Vrindavan, ultimately to die, but first thing he did, he invited like anyone to come to Vrindavan, and he had like 2 weeks of parikramas and doing kirtans and giving classes just to make sure that help his, especially his disciples, to have a closure, to have like this final experience with him. And basically, his idea was that I'll do this, and then I kind of can go a little bit more internal. Of course, that never happened. Finally it did, but he was like, even then, although he was physically becoming more and more ill and having a lot of physical difficulties, still he would get up. Well, let me first finish this thought. His door was kind of always open, like he would never reject anyone. He would always, like, anyone come to see him, anyone had a difficulty, he was like still like giving of himself. So even in his final days, he's like such a friend, so kind, so much compassion always. It was really, really amazing to see. And he would still, even though physically it was getting more and more difficult, still he would like get up every day at 3:30. Sometimes he would not sleep at night. Every day, and he would chant, and he would do his worship, and he would engage in Krishna consciousness, and he would still see people, still give of himself. And like I remember coming into his room, and he was telling me in Dutch, like, I have this urinary tract infection, like I'm feeling really weak, and I was like, it's difficult. But in the whole room, he's sitting in a room full of people. It was like, you know, who are taking guidance from him, who is like trying to inspire, who is like his personality is too selfless. And that continued. Of course, in the end, he just, when he really couldn't, he just kind of became too ill. He would kind of like closed off his apartment. He couldn't see people the same way. Still left his disciples a video. If you can see it, his last message, you can see it on YouTube, the very moving, which he shares a lot of his teachings. Just a few minutes, I'll be going a little bit over time, I apologize for that. One of his things was, as a sannyasi especially, even in Vrindavan, there's 3 altars in Vrindavan. There's Radha Shama Sundar, there's Krishna Balaram, and there's Gaurnitai. So he said he used to always stand between Radha Shama Sundar and Krishna Balaram. That was his like spot during Manga Arati. So, but then he said gradually he moved more and more to the altar of Gaurnitai, because he felt like, actually I need a lot of mercy. If I really want to become Krishna conscious, actually I can't do it on my own. I need a lot of grace. And Lord Chaitanya is the incarnation for this age, Namo Maha Vadanya, the most merciful incarnation. So So he more and more took shelter of Lord Chaitanya. He said also that he felt this was instrumental in him taking sannyas, like becoming like a worldwide like preacher, the holy name, because he took shelter of Lord Chaitanya and he just kind of took him on a ride, let's say. So he was very devoted to Lord Chaitanya. His favorite book would be Chaitanya Charitamrita. He would read this and study it and teach from it. It was like very dear to him. Yeah, that was his mood. Like, I'm very fallen. I'm a very ordinary person, actually. I'm not some kind of saint, like who came, like, I come from a very, not from such a pious background, and Krishna consciousness wasn't actually so natural for him in the beginning. He had to struggle a lot to kind of take it on. So he always felt like, for me to maintain, I need a lot of mercy, a lot of grace. So he really took shelter of Lord Chaitanya in that mood. And he felt like Prabhupada further gave that mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada said, if you chant 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, follow 4 regulated principles, and be very sincere and seriously engage yourself in devotional service, and I will take you back to Godhead. So Prabhupada, as the representative of Lord Chaitanya in this age, Kadamba Swami had very firm faith in his words, that if Prabhupada had said this is a statement in Shastra, Rishi Vakya. If a Rishi, if a great devotee said something, then Krishna is bound to make it happen. So he had full faith because Prabhupada had said this. Krishna will make it happen because Krishna is most dear to Lord Chaitanya Prabhupada. So he had like full faith in that. That if I just take shelter of Srila Prabhupada, of Lord Chaitanya, and follow these teachings faithfully, then everything will be all right. That's what he did. So when his departure came, he had no fear. Even my in-laws went to see him along with my some family members who are not devotees, but they could see this person is so happy. He's dying, but he's so happy, and he has no fear whatsoever. He said, like, I also have nowhere else to go. If I come in front of Krishna, I tell him, Krishna, you have to accept me, because I have nowhere else to go. You're all I have. You're all I've given myself fully to you. There's nothing else I have. So you have to accept me. It was his mood. So then finally, as his body was becoming more and more, started to deteriorate, he couldn't eat anymore at some point. He was only drinking water. So physically it became very difficult. Still, he would get up at 3:30 in the morning, chant, despite all inconveniences go on. Now, at some point, of course, he couldn't do that anymore, like maybe 2 weeks or so before his departure. But he would still chant. He would still, even when he could physically not chant anymore, and he was so weak, like opening his eyes would be difficult. Still, he would be having his beats and chanting in his mind, moving from one beat to another. And he would even tell his guru, Jayaveda Swami, like, he would make a gesture like this, like, chanting in my mind. And then Jayaveda Swami told him, you don't have to chant anymore. Even one beat is enough for a whole round. And then he said, please don't give me that order. Don't give me that order. Because he had full faith that I follow this to the best of my ability, then is my ticket to go back to the spiritual life, to go back to God, and Prabhupada will bless me. And he also felt, if I don't struggle to the very end, I made so many people vow to chant 16 rounds a day. If I don't struggle to the end, then what will they do? So he set this example of like thinking of others as well. There's so much his mood to always think of others. Like, it's like, if I struggle to the very end, then they have no excuse. be strong in Krishna consciousness and dedicate themselves to Srila Prabhupada's teachings and mercy. He didn't take a single painkiller, no morphine, no aspirin even, just tolerated everything. The body was becoming more and more diseased. The chanting was still going on. He would listen to Srila Prabhupada's recordings. And so as I could see in his life, he sometimes really so much transcend the body platform. Towards his departure, I could see like, even though physically he's finished, like his Krishna consciousness would still go on on a whole different level. It was just very impressive to see how, as we read today in the Bhagavatam, the sadhu is not affected by material miseries in the same way because they're absorbed internal thoughts of Krishna. And on the very day he departed, there was a kirtan going on by Bibi Govinda Maharaj, and Jayadvaita Swami was with him in the room. I wasn't there at that time. He came out, and Jayadvaita Swami did like this. He's beaming, he's beaming. Like he was just like absorbed in that kirtan. He was just relishing that kirtan. He said, Jayadvaita Swami said, like he looked like a person whose every desire was completely fulfilled. Around noon, his assistant did the worship of his deity, of Giriraj. And Kadambakhan Swami looked, saw that worship, took the darshan of that deity. And as the puja completed, from his side, he still offered like a final, like he made a gesture like offering in his mind, offering whatever, his heart to his deity. Then he moved towards his back and he started breathing heavily. And I came in that time and I saw his face. It was like his mind, he looked completely calm, completely clear, completely focused. And the kirtan swelled very strongly. And Bibi Govinda Maharaj and his party came into the room and the kirtan became very loud and glorious. And the whole apartment filled up with devotees, chanting and chanting. And in that kirtan in Vrindavan, where he had spent so much of his time, did such sacrifice, where he literally gave his life, he had returned and he just like gloriously departed in full consciousness, no medication, nothing, full clear. He was clear till the end, absorbed in Krishna, the kirtan going very strong. He just, in complete peacefulness, he left to the spiritual realm. It was so glorious. It was just so beautiful to see. It was also, because he was so devoted to the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, also the time when he passed away was also amazing because he passed away 2 days after Gaur Purnima. So he wanted to actually leave on Gaur Purnima. It would be like, but really the way I see it, and it's of course a little bit subjective, that he received that mercy of Lord Chaitanya. And then Gaur Purnima is really 2 days. It's the appearance day, and then the day after this, the festival of Jagannath Mishra. Also, Gaur Purnima is really these 2 days. So he lived through that, and then he departed the day after, receiving the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu fully, and then he departed. That day is also, for those of you from India, you probably know, that day is also the disappearance day of Tukaram Maharaj. A famous Vaishnava saint, devotee of Krishna in Maharashtra. And only later I found out that Kadambakhan Swami actually used to like to watch a movie about Tukaram. It's a very sweet old Indian movie from the 30s. And there's a scene where Tukaram also leaves for the spiritual world, where like a Vaikuntha airplane comes and takes him. And he used to love watching that scene. He would like to watch that scene. I only found out later. So he left on that day, and at this very same time, the Tukaram Maharaj left. So there was also something very extraordinary. It's also the time of the day there's different muhurtas, different times of the day. The most auspicious time is called the Abhijit Muhurta. Where there's different astrological influences at each time, so this is a very auspicious time. So he left at 12:06, and that Muhurta started at 12:05. And just before that, around 11:30, there was like a beautiful, gentle rain shower. Like it's called Devasnan. Like when the sun shines and there's like this gentle shower falling, it's considered also very auspicious. So there was all these like, and the whole room filled up with great like sannyasis and very Prabhupada disciples. This was such a, the departure was just really, someone who gave his life, gave his everything, sacrificed everything, and Krishna is so wonderfully like reciprocated and gave him so much mercy in the end. So just a glorious life and a glorious departure. I'd love to take questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. We're already a little over time. So yeah, the life of the sadhu. We take inspiration from the sadhu in his life and his departure, and we're just trying to dedicate ourselves and follow the footsteps. Those examples inspire us to also. It's said in Krishna book, and this is the last thing I say, Goshen, that the saints, they cross over the ocean of material existence, but they're very kind, because they don't take the boat with them. They keep the boat on this side, so we can also go there. So we take inspiration from their teachings and their example, and following that example, we can also, all of us, each and every one of us, we can attain that same destination. That we are sincere and serious, really dedicate ourselves to our ability. We cannot always be Kadambakanda Swamis or people who are so extraordinary, but in our own way, if we try hard, then we can also attain that. If you want to see more about it, I recommend you a little video called The Last Message. It's on YouTube. Kadambakanda recorded this about 10 days before his departure, when he was physically like finished practically, no more energy. Somehow he gathered some energy to speak for 10 minutes. Borjan Prabhu asked him, how did you do it? He said, desire. I just wanted to do it. Well, physically incapable, he still did it. It's a beautiful 10-minute recording where he gives like his final message. Very much stressing the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, and how we also can attain that perfection. Each and every one of us. So I'll recommend whoever wants to see that. It's called The Last Message. Kadambakanda Swami. His Holiness Kadambakanda Swami Maharaj ki Jai. Prabhupada ki Jai.
If everyone would like to come forward and move the red mats, we'll have our
Hare
Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Ramacharya Siddha Haridas Thakur ki jai, Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopal Gopinath Shyam Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai, Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapur Dham ki jai, Ganga Mani ki jai, Jai ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Sri Devi ki jai, Hari Ram Sankirtan ki jai, Bhagavatam Grantaraj ki jai, Samveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Jai Gaur Brahma Hari Gaur, Verse the Samvata, all verse the Samvata, all verse the Samvata, all verse the Sri Guru Sri Guru. So thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you, Abhay, for beautiful kirtan. Thank you, Radhika, for beautiful kirtan in the beginning.